This story, titled My Girlfriend Flirts with Other Guys in Front of Me and Says It's Harmless, but It's Starting to Make Me Resent Her, begins with a feeling many people know too well, that quiet, uneasy sensation that creeps into your chest when something feels off. But you can't quite put it into words. It's the kind of feeling that starts as a whisper, but grows louder with time, until it's impossible to ignore. For Daniel, that feeling had become an unwanted companion in his relationship. Daniel was 48 years old, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside of Seattle. He had spent years building a stable life for himself. He owned a small construction business, had a tight circle of friends, and prided himself on being the kind of man who valued loyalty above all else. When he met Sophie, a 42-year-old freelance writer with an infectious laugh and an energy that lit up every room, he felt like he had finally found someone who could bring a little spontaneity into his well-ordered life. At first, everything was perfect. Sophie was fun, adventurous, and had a way of making even the most mundane moments feel exciting. But there was something else about her, something that had started as a small quirk, but had grown into a gnawing source of pain for Daniel. Sophie had a habit of flirting, not just with him, with other men. At first, he had tried to ignore it. He told himself it was just part of her personality. She was outgoing, playful, the kind of person who could make anyone feel special. But as time went on, the harmless jokes, the lingering touches on other men's arms, the playful winks, it all started to wear on him. One evening, they went out to dinner with some of Sophie's friends. It was a cozy little restaurant, the kind with dim lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. Daniel had been looking forward to it. A night to relax, enjoy good food, and just be with her. But then it started again. Sophie leaned in a little too close to the waiter as she ordered, laughing at something he said in a way that felt too familiar. She touched the arm of a male friend across the table, flashing him a playful grin. And when a stranger at the bar complimented her dress, she beamed at him, flipping her hair as if Daniel wasn't sitting right there. Daniel clenched his jaw, forcing a smile, but inside, something was boiling. Later that night, as they walked back to the car, he finally spoke up. "Sophie, do you even realize how much you flirt with other men?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. A frustration he couldn't keep buried anymore. Sophie looked at him, genuinely surprised. "What? Dan, come on. You know I'm just being friendly. That's who I am." "No, Sophie," he said, shaking his head. "There's a difference between being friendly and acting like you're single." She laughed, a light, dismissive laugh that made his stomach twist. "You're overreacting. It's just harmless fun." Harmless fun. Daniel wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, something inside him felt different. A crack had formed, a tiny fracture in the foundation of their relationship, and cracks only grow with time. Over the next few weeks, things didn't get better. If anything, they got worse. One night, they went to a work party for one of Sophie's clients. Daniel wasn't particularly excited about it. He wasn't great at small talk, and these kinds of events always left him feeling drained. But he went because he knew it was important to her. The moment they arrived, Sophie slipped effortlessly into the crowd, laughing and chatting with people she barely knew. Daniel stood by the bar, watching as she touched a man's arm, whispering something in his ear that made him chuckle. And then it happened. The man, someone Daniel had never met before, leaned in and whispered something back to her. And instead of pulling away, Sophie laughed, tilting her head in that familiar way. Daniel saw red. He walked over, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey," he said, forcing a smile, though his jaw was clenched tight. "Everything okay over here?" Sophie turned, looking at him like she had forgotten he was even there. "Dan, this is Mark," she said cheerfully. "He was just telling me the funniest story." Daniel didn't care. He barely even heard what she was saying. All he knew was that he was supposed to be the man standing by her side, not some stranger. On the way home, the silence between them was suffocating. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Daniel turned off the engine but didn't move. The tension was thick, pressing down on them like a weight neither of them could ignore. "Sophie," he said quietly, gripping the steering wheel. "I can't keep doing this." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Dan, not this again." "Yes, this again," he snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to watch you act like I don't exist? To have other men looking at you like you're available?" She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I don't mean anything by it." "That doesn't matter," he shot back. "It's not about what you mean. It's about how it makes me feel. For the first time, Sophie didn't respond right away. She just stared at him, her face unreadable. Then she exhaled, shaking her head. Dan, I don't know if I can change who I am. His heart sank, because deep down, he knew this wasn't just a habit, this was who she was, and the real question, when the real question lived with it? The days that followed were filled with an uncomfortable silence. Sophie and Daniel still went through the motions, eating dinner together, watching TV in the evenings, but something between them had shifted. The warmth that once wrapped around their relationship had thinned into something cold and distant. Daniel wanted to believe that Sophie would make an effort to change, that she would see how much this was hurting him. But deep down, he feared that her words in the car that night had been the truth. Maybe she couldn't change. Maybe she didn't want to. One evening, they were invited to a small gathering at a friend's house. Daniel wasn't in the mood, but Sophie had insisted. "It'll be fun," she had said, her voice light. "Maybe we need this." So he went. But almost immediately, he regretted it. Sophie was in her element, laughing, talking, floating from conversation to conversation as if she belonged to everyone and no one at the same time. And then, just as Daniel had feared, it started again. She leaned into a man he barely knew, whispering something in his ear that made him grin. She playfully nudged another man's arm, giggling at something he said. And all the while, Daniel stood there, watching, feeling like a shadow in the background. Something inside him snapped. Without a word, he turned and walked outside, the cool night air hitting him like a slap to the face. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the resentment in his chest had been building for too long. A few minutes later, he heard the door open behind him. Sophie stepped out, her arms crossed. "Dan, what's going on?" He turned to her, his voice quieter than he expected. "Do you even see me, Sophie?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" "I mean it," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "Do you even see me standing there when you're flirting with other men, or do I just disappear?" Sophie's expression changed, a flicker of guilt flashing across her face, but then, just as quickly, it was gone. "Dan, it's not a big deal. It's who I am." "That's not an excuse," he said firmly. "Not anymore." She sighed, shaking her head. "So, what? You want me to stop talking to people? Stop having fun?" "No," he said, his jaw tight. "I want you to respect me. I want you to care about how this makes me feel. But the truth is, I don't think you do." For the first time, Sophie was silent, and that silence told him everything he needed to know. Daniel felt his heart ache, but there was also a strange sense of clarity washing over him. He had spent so much time hoping that Sophie would change, waiting for her to understand what she was doing to him. But standing there, in the cool night air, he realized the hardest truth of all. She wasn't going to change. And he couldn't keep waiting for her to. That night, Daniel packed a bag. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just looked at Sophie one last time and said, "I deserve more than this." And for the first time in a long time, he finally believed it. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Let's talk about it.